Millionaire sees poor twins hugging in the hallway. One says, "He looks just like..." The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's General Hospital cast harsh shadows across the polished linoleum floors as Daniel Blake adjusted his Italian silk tie and checked his Rolex. At 42, he commanded boardrooms across Silicon Valley, his tech empire worth north of $2 billion. Today's meeting with the hospital's board of directors was supposed to be routine, a charitable donation to enhance his company's public image, nothing more. His leather shoes clicked rhythmically against the floor as he navigated the maze of corridors, following the signs toward the administrative wing. The antiseptic smell mixed with industrial coffee created an atmosphere that made him want to finish his business quickly and return to his penthouse office overlooking San Francisco Bay. But as he rounded the corner near the ICU, his purposeful stride came to an abrupt halt. Two small figures sat huddled together on a worn vinyl bench against the pale green wall. Twin children, no more than 7 years old, clung to each other with the desperate intensity of survivors in a storm. The little boy's dark hair was tousled and unkempt, his red dinosaur t-shirt wrinkled and stained. His sister wore a faded pink dress that had seen better days, her matching dark hair pulled back in a lopsided ponytail, secured with a rubber band. Their clothes spoke of hand-me-downs and thrift store finds, yet there was something about their faces, the bone structure, the way the boy's eyebrows furrowed in concentration, the girl's delicate chin, that made Daniel's breath catch in his throat. "Mummy's been in there a really long time," the little girl whispered, her voice barely audible above the hospital's ambient noise. "She's gonna be okay, Emma," the boy replied, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. "The doctor said she just needs to rest." Daniel found himself frozen, unable to look away. A strange sensation washed over him, like déjà vu mixed with something deeper, more unsettling. The rational part of his mind told him to continue walking, to attend his meeting, to maintain the careful boundaries he'd built around his personal life. But something about these children held him captive. The little girl, Emma, suddenly looked up, her tear-stained cheeks catching the harsh hospital lighting. Her eyes, a striking shade of green that seemed almost familiar, met his across the hallway. For a moment, neither moved. Then, in a voice that barely qualified as a whisper, she said something that made Daniel's carefully constructed world begin to crumble. "He looks just like..." "Emma, don't stare at strangers," her brother quickly interrupted, wrapping his arm more tightly around her shoulders and pulling her closer. But the damage was done. Those 4 words hung in the air like a revelation waiting to be completed. Daniel's pulse quickened as fragmented memories began to surface, memories he'd spent years burying beneath layers of success and ambition. He took a tentative step forward, his usual confidence replaced by something he rarely experienced: vulnerability. "Trust, you two okay?" he asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. The boy, who couldn't have been more than a few minutes older than his sister, straightened his shoulders with the premature responsibility that poverty often forces upon children. "We're fine, sir. Just waiting for our mom." "How long have you been waiting?" The children exchanged glances. "Since yesterday," Emma admitted before her brother could stop her. "Yesterday?" Daniel's eyebrows rose. "Have you eaten anything?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Daniel's chest tightened, not with the familiar pressure of closing million-dollar deals, but with something more primal, more human. "What are your names?" he asked, kneeling down to their eye level, his expensive suit forgotten. "I'm Michael," the boy said reluctantly. "This is Emma. We're twins." "Michael and Emma," Daniel repeated, and something about saying their names aloud sent another wave of recognition through him. "And your last name?" Michael hesitated, clearly weighing whether this well-dressed stranger could be trusted. "Thompson," he finally said. The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. Thompson. Sarah Thompson. His mind raced back 15 years to a different life, a different version of himself. Before the IPOs and acquisitions, before the penthouse and the Forbes covers, there had been Sarah, sweet, determined Sarah, who'd worked 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school. Sarah, who'd believed in his dreams when he was just another struggling programmer with big ideas and empty pockets. Sarah, who'd left without a word one autumn morning, taking with her not just his heart, but something else he'd never known existed. "Your mother?" Daniel said, his voice barely steady. "What's her name?" "Sarah," Emma said simply. Sarah Thompson. The hospital corridor seemed to tilt around Daniel. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects, and the smell of disinfectant became overwhelming. He gripped the arm of the bench to steady himself, his knuckles white against the vinyl. Is she going to be okay?" he managed to ask. Michael's brave facade finally cracked. "The doctors won't tell us much because we're just kids. But I heard them talking about surgery and something about her heart," and his voice broke, and Emma immediately pulled him closer. Daniel's throat constricted. Sarah. After all these years, after convincing himself that she'd simply moved onto someone who could give her stability, she'd been here in his city, raising children who looked remarkably like. "Sir?" Emma's small voice interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Are you okay? You look sad." He looked down at her upturned face, at the concern in those green eyes that were so achingly familiar, and felt his chest tighten further. This little girl, barely 7 years old and facing the possible loss of her mother, was worried about him. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, surprised by how naturally the endearment came. "But I'm worried about you too. Have you called anyone? Grandparents? Other
Family?"
Both children shook their heads. "It's just us and Mom," Michael said. "She says family is what you make it, not what you're born with." The words sounded exactly like something Sarah would say, philosophical and comforting, even in the face of hardship. Daniel remembered her saying similar things during their own struggles, when his startup was failing and eviction notices were piling up on their kitchen table. "Listen," Daniel said, making a decision that surprised even him. "Would you like to get something to eat? There's a cafeteria downstairs, and I think your mom would want you to keep your strength up." Michael immediately shook his head. "We can't leave. What if the doctor comes out? What if Mom needs us?" "I'll make sure the nurses know where we are," Daniel assured him. "They'll call us if anything changes." As he spoke, he was already reaching for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number for Dr. Patricia Hendricks, Chief of Staff and today's scheduled meeting partner. "Patricia, it's Daniel Blake. I need to postpone our meeting. No, something important has come up. Yes, I understand the donation is significant, but..." He paused, watching Emma try to comfort her brother, whose composure was finally beginning to crack. "There are 2 children here, twins. Their mother, Sarah Thompson, is in the ICU. I need to know her condition and prognosis." "Yes, I'll hold on." Michael and Emma stared at him with wide eyes. "You know the doctors?" Emma asked. "I know some people here," Daniel said carefully. It wasn't exactly a lie. His charitable foundation had connections throughout the medical community. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Hendricks came back on the line. Daniel listened intently, his expression growing more grave with each word. When he finally hung up, both children were watching him expectantly. "Your mom is stable," he said, choosing his words carefully. "She had what's called a cardiac episode. Her heart isn't working as well as it should. She's going to need surgery, but the doctors are very good here." "When?" Michael asked. "Tomorrow morning. She's resting now, getting stronger for the operation." Emma's lower lip trembled. "Can we see her?" Daniel glanced toward the ICU doors, then back at these children who were stirring emotions he'd thought long buried. "Let me talk to the nurses." Sometimes they make exceptions for the family. As they walked toward the nurse's station, Emma slipped her small hand into his. The gesture was so natural, so trusting, that Daniel felt his throat close up entirely. When was the last time anyone had reached for him with such simple faith? "Mister," Emma said as they walked. "Yes? What's your name?" He hesitated for just a moment. Daniel Blake." "Thank you, Mr. Daniel," she said seriously. "You're being very kind to us." Michael, walking on Daniel's other side, looked up at him with an expression far too mature for his 7 years. "Why are you helping us? Most grown-ups just walk by." The question cut deeper than Daniel expected. Why was he helping them? Professional, obligation, guilt over his wealth compared to their obvious poverty? Or was it something more elemental, the nagging familiarity that grew stronger with every passing moment? "Because," Daniel said finally, "sometimes when we see people who need help, we're supposed to help them, even if we don't understand why yet." As they approached the nurse's station, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered life was about to change forever. These children, with their resilience and their faces that seemed like echoes from his past, were about to teach him something about the family he'd thought he'd lost and the man he'd forgotten how to be. The nurse on duty, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, looked up as they approached. "Can I help you? I'm Daniel Blake. I called earlier about Sarah Thompson's condition. These are her children, Michael and Emma. They've been here since yesterday, and I was wondering if they might be able to see their mother, even briefly." The nurse's expression softened as she looked at the twins. "Oh, you two. I've been worried about you. We don't usually allow children in the ICU, but..." She glanced at Daniel, clearly recognizing his name and the influence it carried. "Let me see what I can do." As they waited, Daniel found himself studying the children's faces more intently. Michael had Sarah's stubborn chin and determined eyes, but something about his profile, the way he held his shoulders, seemed familiar in a different way. Emma's green eyes were definitely Sarah's, but her smile, when it appeared, reminded him of someone else entirely. The nurse returned with a gentle smile. "Dr. Martinez has agreed to let you see your mother for just a few minutes. She's sleeping, but you can hold her hand and talk to her quietly." Both children's faces lit up with relief and gratitude. As they followed the nurse toward the ICU, Emma looked back at Daniel. "Are you coming too, Mr. Daniel?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications Daniel wasn't ready to face. Seeing Sarah again after 15 years, after building an entire life around the assumption that she was gone forever, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. But looking at these children, at their hope and trust and desperate need for stability in their chaos, he found himself nodding. "If you want me to," he said. And as they pushed through the doors into the ICU, Daniel Blake, tech mogul, billionaire, master of his own destiny, felt more uncertain about the future than he had since those early days when he was just a young man in love with a nursing student who believed in impossible dreams. The past was about to collide with the present, and nothing would ever be the same. The ICU hummed with the quiet efficiency of life-sustaining technology. Monitors beeped steadily, ventilators whispered, and the subdued lighting created an atmosphere of hushed reverence for the fragile lives being maintained within these walls. Daniel followed the twins down the corridor, his heart pounding harder with each step. 15 years. 15 years of wondering what had happened to Sarah, of convincing himself that she'd found someone better, someone who could give her the stability he couldn't provide during those struggling early days of his career. Room 314. The nurse stopped outside and turned to the children. "Remember, your mother is sleeping, and she has some tubes and wires attached to help her breathe and monitor her heart. Don't be frightened by all the equipment. It's all there to help her get better." Michael squeezed Emma's hand tighter. "We understand." The nurse pushed open the door, and Daniel's world stopped. There, lying pale and still beneath white hospital sheets, was Sarah. Her dark hair, now shorter and streaked with premature silver, fanned across the pillow. Even unconscious, even diminished by illness, she was unmistakably the woman who had once shared his dreams and his bed, who had believed in him when he barely believed in himself. But it was more than just seeing her again that made Daniel's knees weak. It was the realization that now crashed over him with the force of a tsunami. These children, with their familiar features and their ages that corresponded exactly to the timeline of Sarah's disappearance, weren't just resembling someone from his memory. They were his. Emma immediately went to the left side of the bed and carefully took her mother's hand, being mindful of the IV line. "Hi, Mommy," she whispered. "We're here. We brought someone nice to meet you." Michael positioned himself. On the right side, his small hand finding Sarah's free one. "She looks better than yesterday," he said to his sister, though his voice carried the false optimism of a child trying to be brave. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, unable to breathe. The math was undeniable. Sarah had left. 15 years ago, these children were 7. She must have been pregnant when she left. Pregnant and too afraid or too proud to tell him. "Mr. Daniel?" Emma's voice cut through his paralysis. "Don't you want to say hi to our mom?" Somehow, his legs carried him forward. Each step felt like walking through water, every movement requiring conscious effort. When he reached the foot of the bed, he could see Sarah more clearly, and the years fell away like autumn leaves. She looked tired, more tired than sleep could account for. Her face, though still beautiful, carried the weight of years of struggle. Her hands, once soft from the luxury of their brief time together when his first company went public, were now marked by work, by cleaning houses and waitressing and whatever else she'd done to support these children. His children. The thought hit him again, and this time he had to grip the bed rail to stay upright. "She works really hard," Michael said quietly, noticing Daniel's intense focus on their mother. "Sometimes she works 3 jobs to make sure we have everything we need." "3 jobs?" Daniel's voice came out as barely a whisper. "She cleans offices. At night, works at the diner during the day, and helps Mrs. Patterson with her grocery store on weekends," Emma added matter-of-factly. "She says hard work builds character." Daniel's chest constricted. While he'd been building his empire, accumulating wealth beyond imagination, Sarah had been working herself to exhaustion to raise their children. The irony was almost too bitter to bear. He could have given them everything, but he'd never known they existed. "She never told you about me, did she?" he asked, the question tumbling out before he could stop it. Both children looked at him with confusion. "Told us what?" Michael asked. Daniel's mouth went dry. "How do you tell children that their father isn't dead or absent by choice, but simply didn't know they existed? How do you explain 15 years of missed birthdays, missed bedtime, stories, missed everything?" Daniel started, then stopped. This wasn't the time or place. Not while Sarah lay unconscious. Not while these children were already dealing with the terror of potentially losing their mother. But Emma, with the intuitive perception that children sometimes possess, tilted her head and studied his face with those startlingly familiar green eyes. "You have the same eyes as Michael," she said suddenly. Michael looked up from his mother's hand to stare at Daniel, and Daniel saw his own eyes looking back at him, the same dark brown with flecks of gold, the same shape, the same intensity, and the same nose, Michael added quietly, his voice filled with wonder and growing realization. The moment stretched between them, heavy with implication. Daniel could see the wheels turning in Michael's sharp mind, could see the boy putting together pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed. "Are you Michael started, then stopped as if afraid to voice the question. Before Daniel could respond, the door opened behind them. Dr. Martinez, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, pulled back in a neat bun, entered with a clipboard. "Good afternoon," she said gently. "I'm Dr. Martinez, your mother's cardiologist." She paused, taking in the scene, two children flanking their mother's bed, and Daniel standing at the foot like a sentinel. "Are you family?" she asked Daniel. The question hung in the air like smoke. Daniel looked at Michael and Emma, at these children who carried his eyes and his features, at Sarah lying unconscious between them, and felt the weight of 15 lost years pressing down on his shoulders. "Yes," he said finally, his voice stronger than he felt. "I believe I am." Dr. Martinez nodded, apparently satisfied. "I wanted to update you on your mother's condition," she said, addressing the twins. "The surgery scheduled for tomorrow morning will repair the damaged valve in her heart. It's a serious procedure, but she's young and otherwise healthy. We have every reason to be optimistic." "Will she be okay after?" Emma asked, her small voice filled with hope and fear in equal measure. "Recovery will take time, but yes, with proper care and rest, she should make a full recovery." Relief flooded both children's faces, and Daniel felt his own shoulders relax slightly. But Dr. Martinez continued. "However, the recovery period will be significant. She'll need to be off work for at least 6 weeks, possibly longer, and even after she's medically cleared to return to work, it should be light duty only for several months." The implications hit Daniel immediately, but it was Michael who voiced them. 6 weeks without working? His young face paled. "But our rent is due next week and—" "Don't worry about that now," Daniel said quickly before he could stop himself. "We'll figure it out." All eyes turned to him, the children with hope, Dr. Martinez's with curiosity. He'd said "we" without thinking, automatically including himself in their small family unit. "Mr. Daniel," Emma said slowly, "why do you want to help us so much?" Daniel looked down at her upturned face, at the trust and innocence there, and felt something crack open in his chest. These children deserved the truth, even if Sarah had chosen to keep it from them, but they also deserved to have that truth come from their mother when she was ready to give it. "Because," he said carefully, "sometimes we meet people who are important to us, even if we don't realize how important right away." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Dr. Martinez cleared her throat gently. "If you'll excuse me, I need to prep for surgery tomorrow. The children can stay a few more minutes, but then they should get some rest themselves." After she left, the room fell into quiet contemplation. Emma continued to hold her mother's hand, while Michael stood protectively at her side. Daniel remained at the foot of the bed, watching these children, his children, and marveling at their strength and resilience. "Mr. Daniel," Michael's voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, if something happens to Mom during the surgery, what happens to us?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. In his research into Sarah's condition, he'd focused on medical outcomes, not on the broader implications for these children who clearly had no other family support system. "Nothing's going to happen to your mother," Daniel said firmly. "But even if there were complications, you wouldn't be alone. I promise you that." "But you barely know us," Emma pointed out with startling logic. Daniel moved closer to her side of the bed, kneeling down so he was at her eye level. "Sometimes," he said softly, "we know people better than we think we do. Sometimes we're connected in ways that we don't understand right away." Emma studied his face intently, her green eyes, so like her mother's, seeming to see straight into his soul. "My teacher says everyone has a story," she said. "What's your story, Mr. Daniel?" The innocent question nearly undid him. His story. His story was success and wealth and achievement, but also loneliness and regret and 15 years of wondering what might have been. His story was falling in love with a nursing student named Sarah Thompson and then losing her when his ambition outweighed his wisdom. His story was building an empire while the most important part of his life grew up without him ever knowing it existed. My story, he said carefully, is still being written, but I think the best chapters might be just the beginning. A soft sound from the bed made all three of them turn. Sarah's eyelids fluttered and her fingers moved slightly in Emma's grasp. "Mommy," Emma whispered urgently. "Mommy, can you hear me?" Sarah's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually clearing as they landed on her daughter's face. "Emma?" Her voice was barely audible, roughened by the breathing tube that had been removed earlier. "We're here, Mom," Michael said, leaning forward so she could see him too. "Both of us." Sarah's gaze moved between her children, relief and love washing over her features. Then, as if sensing another presence, her eyes shifted toward the foot of the bed and stopped. The moment when Sarah Thompson's eyes met Daniel Blake's across 15 years of separation was like watching the past and present collide in real time. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally something that looked like grief mixed with fear. "Daniel?" The name escaped her lips like a prayer, like a curse, like a question she'd never expected to have to ask. "Hello, Sarah," he said gently. The machines monitoring her vital signs began beeping faster, reflecting her increased heart rate. Michael and Emma looked between their mother and Daniel with growing confusion and dawning realization. How are you here?" Sarah asked, struggling to sit up despite her weakness. "I was here for a meeting. I saw Michael and Emma in the hallway." Daniel's voice was carefully controlled, but Emma could hear the emotion beneath it. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she looked at her children, then back at Daniel. The truth hung between them, unspoken but undeniable. "Mommy," Emma said softly, "who is he really?" Sarah closed her eyes, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. When she opened them again, she looked directly at Daniel with an expression of profound sadness and regret. She started, then stopped, her voice failing her. "I'm your father," Daniel said quietly, the words finally spoken aloud, making them real in a way that changed everything. "I'm your father, and I never knew you existed until today." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael and Emma stared at him, then at their mother, trying to process this revelation that reframed their entire lives. "But Mom said," Michael started, then trailed off. "What did she say?" Daniel asked, gently. "That our father was a good man who couldn't be with us," Emma whispered. Daniel looked at Sarah, and in her eyes he saw the weight of 15 years of protecting these children from what she'd perceived as abandonment. 15 years of carrying the burden of single parenthood rather than risk rejection or disruption. "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking slightly. Sarah's tears flowed freely now. "You were so focused on your company, on succeeding. When I found out, I was pregnant, your startup was failing, we were barely making rent. I thought I'd be holding you back. I thought you'd see us as a burden." A burden. Daniel's voice rose slightly. Then he caught himself, remembering where they were. "Sarah, they're my children. They're the most important thing that could have ever happened to me." "I know that now," Sarah whispered. "I've watched you on the news, seen what you've built, but back then I was scared and proud and stupid, and I thought I was protecting everyone." Michael, who had been listening intently, suddenly stepped forward. "You're really our dad?" he asked Daniel directly. "Yes." "And you really didn't know about us?" "No, I didn't. But I wish I had. I wish I'd been there for your first steps, your first words, your first days of school." Daniel's voice cracked. "I wish I'd been there for everything." Emma, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly let go of her mother's hand and walked around the bed to Daniel. Without a word, she wrapped her small arms around his waist and hugged him tightly. "It's okay," she said simply. "You're here now." Daniel knelt down and wrapped his arms around his daughter, and felt 15 years of loneliness and regret begin to crack and shift. Michael joined them after a moment, and for the first time in their lives, the Blake family was together. Over the children's heads, Daniel met Sarah's eyes. There was forgiveness there and gratitude, and the beginning of something that might eventually heal the wounds they'd both carried for so long. "The surgery tomorrow," Daniel said, still holding his children. "Whatever you need, the best surgeons. Private recovery, anything—" "Daniel," Sarah interrupted gently, "I can't afford—" "You don't need to afford anything. They're my children too, which makes you family, and family takes care of family." As the hospital continued its quiet rhythms around them, as monitors beeped and machines hummed, the Blake family began the long process of becoming whole. There would be difficult conversations ahead, legal procedures to navigate, and years of lost time to somehow bridge. But for now, in this sterile room filled with the scent of antiseptic and hope, a tech mogul who thought he had everything learned what it really meant to be rich, and two 7-year-old twins discovered that sometimes the missing piece of your life can walk into a hospital hallway when you least expect it. The story that had begun with a chance encounter and 4 unfinished words, "He looks just like," had become the beginning of something new. A family reunited, a love rediscovered, and a future filled with possibility. Outside the window, the San Francisco skyline glittered in the afternoon sun, and Daniel Blake realized that all the success in the world meant nothing compared to the 2 small hands that held his, and the woman who had given him the greatest gift of all, even if it had taken 15 years for him to unwrap it. The best chapters of his story were indeed just beginning. The end. Thank you for watching this story unfold with us here on M&A The Story Unfolds. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of the world you're joining us from. Your support means everything. See you in the next story.